The Galactic Council expected screams. What they got was a spreadsheet war declaration, a knife-wielding grandma marrying a boulder, and a cult leader baptizing lightning. Humanity was sent to die. Instead, they filed taxes on gravity and taught the Deathworld how to love combat. They said no one survived Galactic 9 longer than 12 hours. Acid fog. Gravity bursts. Weaponized humidity. The usual planetary red flags. Perfect, the Galactic Assembly decided, for their human problem. Discreet extermination disguised as an exploratory mission. Drop a bunch of Earth's non-essential humans, no political leaders, no ambassadors, just the loud, annoying ones, onto the most hostile place in known space. Let nature do what the Council couldn't without starting an interstellar war. And so the pod screamed into Gracthar's atmosphere, cracked in half on impact, and dumped 4 humans into boiling moss. Mick Rubens emerged first, already mid-complaint. This moss is untaxed. That's the first red flag. He was holding a calculator like it was a weapon. Not a metaphor, he'd modified it with tungsten blades and an AI chip he'd stolen from the IRS. I thought this was an expedition, Doug muttered, dragging a sack labeled Emergency Soup Kit. His optimism made people uncomfortable. Mick, is the moss sentient? Only if it files a return. Eudora McCragen crawled from the wreckage next, knife in her teeth, hair blazing silver like a war banner. She said nothing, just stabbed a vine that twitched too close. Then Tylo hopped out, barefoot and ecstatic, cradling a smooth gray rock. Kevin's fine, he announced. Kevin says the sky wants to eat us. Mick raised an eyebrow. Kevin being the rock? Tylo nodded. He's shy. Don't interrupt him. Above them, thunder cracked horizontally. Rain began falling in tight spirals. Doug opened a thermos and caught a few drops. It hissed through the lid. Rain's acidic. Smells like vinegar and burnt ego. Eudora stabbed a raindrop midair. We'll adapt. They walked. For 3 hours, the ground changed color every 7 steps. A tree tried to scam Mick. A cloud whispered insults in binary. Tylo began a sermon. Doug took notes. Eudora threw knives at shadows. At hour 4, the first local life form attacked. A 12-legged predator that looked like a lion, a blender, and a crime scene had a baby. It roared molten spit and charged. Mick sighed. That thing's a capital gains liability. Eudora sprinted forward without hesitation, knives drawn, eyes gleaming with the glee of a woman denied violence for too long. She didn't dodge, she insulted it. Nice legs, blender boy. I've mailed letters faster than you. She slashed left, ducked right, and embedded a blade in its eye socket. The thing shrieked. Tylo stepped forward and anointed it with lemon juice. Be not afraid. Join Kevin. The creature spasmed, turned a curious shade of purple, and slumped over. Doug poked it with a ladle. It's either dead or really into Tylo's religion. I call that a tax deduction, Mick muttered. 3 more attacks came. They won every time, not with better weapons, but with weirder decisions. When the air began trying to unmake their lungs, Doug built a breathing apparatus out of soup steam and optimism. When gravity tripled without warning, Mick triangulated the planetary core and shouted it into compliance with tax law. When a carnivorous bush tried to eat Eudora, she proposed marriage. The bush declined. She took that personally. Tylo taught a passing dust storm calculus. The dust storm circled back with snacks. Kevin glowed faintly. By the end of day 1, Galactic 9 was confused. These weren't apex predators. These were apex problems. The assembly tuned into the surveillance feed, expecting blood. Instead, they watched Mick scolding a volcano. You can't just erupt during off hours. That's an OSHA violation. The volcano stopped. Doug planted edible plants in ash. Eudora carved a lounge chair from lava rock. Tylo blessed a stream and baptized a frog. The frog grew wings and followed him like a prophet. Mick tapped on his calculator. We're not surviving. We're conducting a hostile takeover. A second predator appeared. This one was airborne, sleek, and radiated malice. Eudora looked up, smiled, and whispered, "Finally!" It swooped. She sprinted, launched herself off Doug's makeshift soup cauldron, and tackled the beast out of the air. They rolled down a hill of spiked bones. She emerged alone, bleeding, grinning, dragging the thing's spine like a trophy. "Made a coat," Doug applauded. "You look very festive." The wind picked up. The planet roared, a deep groaning sound like tectonic rage. Mick didn't flinch. "Let it scream. It'll learn." The ground beneath them shifted, slower now, almost cautiously. Like it was waiting to see what they'd do next. The ecosystem began to hesitate. Predators paused before attacking. Trees leaned away instead of toward. A storm blinked and vanished. Gractor 9 wasn't trying to kill them anymore. It was trying to understand them. By nightfall, they'd claimed a crater and turned it into a base. Doug lit a fire with enthusiastic soup. Tylo led prayers to Kevin. Eudora sharpened her knives, singing threats. Mick drafted legal documents naming himself chief auditor of all dirt. "I think," Doug said slowly, "we're winning." Tylo smiled dreamily. "Kevin says the planet's watching?" Mick nodded. "Good. Let it take notes." Overhead, the clouds spun into spirals, a mimicry of Tylo's sermon symbols. Far below, the magma rivers shifted paths to avoid their camp. The assembly watched in silence, their jaws clenched. "They're not just surviving," one delegate said. "They're conquering." Back on Gractor 9, Mick filed a requisition form to reroute a canyon. Eudora trained local wildlife to fetch knives. Doug discovered the rocks sang if you hummed just right. Tylo taught geometry to a thunderstorm. They didn't sleep much. They didn't need to. Tomorrow they'd build. But tonight, they smiled as the Deathworld flinched. "You're building a what?" Mick didn't look up from his spreadsheet, but the edge in his voice could cut metal. "A gladiator pit," Eudora said, planting a jagged blade into the ground for emphasis. "For diplomacy. We're on a death world." "Exactly. You think anyone's gonna negotiate over coffee here? They respect violence. I speak their language." She unsheathed another knife and whistled. A mutated rodent the size of a sheep came trotting toward her with lumber stacked on its back. Tylo clapped. "Kevin approves. He says bloodshed is cleansing if it's consensual." Mick looked up. "The rock talks now?" Tylo nodded solemnly. "He's multilingual." "Said the moss agrees with Eudora." Mick sighed and marked down unsanctioned arena construction under emerging liabilities. Doug appeared with a ladle, sloshing something that smelled like soup and looked like molten metal. "Lunch?" he offered. "What's in it?" Mick asked. "Don't ask. It passed the spoon test. The spoon melted yesterday." "Exactly." Mick ignored the offer. Instead, he studied the topography shifting around them. Gractor 9 wasn't acting like a planet anymore. It was responding. The trees leaned inward to listen when they spoke. The wind stopped when Mick made corrections to the land budget. Something deeper was taking notes. Eudora's arena was half built by noon. Locals started showing up. Not natives. Not predators. Aliens. Species long thought lost to the death world. Gaunt, twitchy, broken things, but they came to watch. The first one spoke to Doug. "You're human?" "Yes," Doug said, smiling. "You like soup?" The creature stared at the cauldron, shivered, and nodded. It cried halfway through the first bowl. "I thought kindness was extinct here." "It's highly flammable," Doug said. "But we're working on it." Word spread. More appeared. Scavengers, survivors, things the galaxy assumed long dead. They weren't refugees. They were worshippers. And Eudora gave them a show. That evening, she faced a chitinous beast in her pit, 6 arms, all blades. She walked in without armor. The crowd watched silently as she ducked, spun, and slammed a knee into the creature's thorax. It shrieked and lunged. She caught its arm and stabbed upward, twisting. Blood sprayed. The crowd roared. Eudora bowed and threw her knife into the air, catching it behind her back. I call that peace talk. They cheered. Even the planet trembled in approval. Trees shuddered. Stone cracked with applause. Mick scowled, scribbling notes. This is diplomacy by blood sport. Tylo drifted past, eyes glowing faintly. Kevin says that's how the universe began. We need structure, Mick muttered. A government. Regulation. Tax codes. They're worshipping knife fights and soup. Because they work, Doug said. It's not about control. It's about impact. No, Mick said flatly. It's about survival through strategy. We can't keep reacting. You're literally weaponizing spreadsheets. And it's working. Mick spent the night drafting policy. He labeled regions of the terrain as zones. He taxed rainfall. He imposed tariffs on gravity. Somehow, the environment began complying. Rivers flowed smoother. Landslides paused on command. Clouds aligned with pie charts. The map adjusted itself as if obeying financial law. Meanwhile, Doug taught the survivors how to farm with fireproof seeds. Tylo meditated and levitated, channeling Kevin's wisdom into architecture shaped like fractal prayers. The structures held. They didn't just hold, they thrived. By morning, the arena had rules. Combatants signed waivers. Winners earned property. Losers got free soup. Mick turned to Eudora, tired but focused. We're making a society. She shrugged. As long as I get to throw people through tables, sure. They had visitors by noon. Not survivors, aliens from outside. A scouting ship from the Glaran Empire landed nearby, armored and bristling with weapons. The soldiers stepped out, expecting corpses. They found tax zones, urban soup kitchens, and a knife pit. A captain approached, helmet scanning. You are humans? Mick didn't look up from his tablet. You have a permit to land? What? This is a zone of declared order. Entry requires paperwork. The captain laughed. This is a Deathworld. Used to be, Mick said, standing. Now it's a territory. We call it Earth 2. Slightly angrier. Doug stepped forward. You guys like soup? The captain raised a rifle. Eudora moved before he finished raising it. The rifle hit the ground first. Then his kneecap. Then he screamed. Her blade stopped at his throat. You raise a weapon here, she said. You better be praying to Kevin. Tylo placed a hand on the man's helmet and whispered something in tongues. The helmet glowed. The captain sobbed and collapsed, muttering. The rock knows my sins. By nightfall, the Glaran soldiers joined the campfire. Doug served soup. Eudora taught them knife etiquette. Mick explained tariff zones. Tylo baptized their weapons. The Glarans didn't just join. They pledged allegiance. And Gracthar 9 watched it all. The forests glowed. The winds shifted to play background music. Lava erupted into spirals shaped like approval ratings. The assembly received the footage and choked. These humans aren't just surviving, said one diplomat. They're colonizing a death world. No, the analyst said, pale. They're converting it. On Gracthar, Mick stood over a table of maps, grids, and color-coded legislation. We need infrastructure. Doug passed him a blueprint for a soup-powered tram system. Already working on it. Eudora slammed a knife into the center. And a Colosseum expansion. With lava floors. Tylo raised Kevin, glowing now like a holy relic. Kevin says it's time we built a cathedral. Mick smiled, teeth sharp with victory. Then let's write the Constitution. The message from the Galactic Assembly came as a half-hearted warning, buried in static. Unauthorized expansion activity detected. Cease and desist. Mick read it twice, then forwarded it to the recycling bin. He had better things to do, like finish drafting the Gracthar Revenue Code, subsection 19b. War profits and lava toll booths. He wasn't alone anymore. The population had tripled in a week. Former enemies now paid taxes. Rogue scavengers ran knife shops. A fungus entity applied for dual citizenship. Tylo's cult ran literacy programs, and Doug's soup had created a modest black market in edible currency. What started as a survival camp had become a functioning society. Chaotic, violent, unpredictable, but stable. A Galarian envoy approached the council fire. He bowed to Mick, eyes flicking to the tax ledger. "We've brought a delegation from the Vrex Dominion," he said. "They want to join the Knife Accord." Mick glanced at Eudora, who smirked and cleaned blood off a ceremonial blade. "Tell them to bring a champion. No bribes, no speeches. Just bruises," Doug added. "And we're low on lentils. Diplomacy costs food." Tylo held up Kevin, now enshrined in a crystal casing. "Kevin says violence is sacred, but soup is holier." The envoy blinked. "We'll bring both." By midday, the Vrex landed with banners and a warrior the size of a dropship. His weapon roared plasma. His translator said his name meant pain that smiles. Eudora cracked her knuckles. "Sounds like prom night." Mick stood before the growing crowd. "Combat begins at noon. Winner gets trade rights and municipal status. Loser pays a fine in mushrooms or bones." The fight was savage. Blades clashed, teeth snapped, blood painted the sand. But Eudora never slowed. She dodged like a storm, struck like memory, and disarmed the warrior by breaking both of his arms. She placed her knife against his neck not to kill, but to offer terms. "You join, you follow the code. I don't care what empire you crawled out of." The warrior nodded, face twitching in confused respect. That night, the Vrex signed the compact with ceremonial stew and a rock blessing. The Dominion was absorbed. Not conquered. Not annexed. Absorbed. Mick updated the tax map. Doug started a festival. Tylo declared it the Feast of Bones and Beans. Mick called an emergency council. "We're too big," he said, pointing at charts scrawled on banana bark. "We've got 3 currencies, 2 knife languages, and a storm cult forming in the west." "Progress," Doug said brightly. "It's chaos," Mick snapped. "We need unification. Standard law. Core principles." Eudora lit a cigar with a spark rock and leaned back. "Then we draft our own constitution." "I already started," Tylo said, pulling out a scroll. "It's mostly emotional metaphors and lightning math." "We'll take the spirit," Mick said, "but add real policy. This isn't just survival anymore. We're a civilization." Doug tapped his ladle on the table. "We need a name." "Earth 2 is too small," Eudora added. Tylo closed his eyes. Kevin whispers. "Sympathica." Mick snorted. "No. Knifeopia?" Eudora offered. "Worse." Doug raised a hand. "What about Haven?" No one spoke. The wind, once hostile, calmed. "Haven," Mick repeated. A new banner rose the next morning. One word, stitched into alien silk. Haven. Beneath it, soup kitchens, tax booths, dueling pits, and floating sermons. The planet didn't resist. It adjusted. Gracther 9 had stopped being a death world. It had become a host. That's when the Empire attacked. A dreadnought-class cruiser appeared without warning, blocked the sky with its shadow, and demanded immediate surrender. Their voice thundered through speakers designed to terrify. "This territory is unauthorized. You will evacuate and submit to inspection." Tylo walked into the clearing, flanked by robed storm worshippers. "We decline." Mick followed, holding a formal invoice for interstellar trespassing. "You're violating Article 7 of Haven's Sovereignty Clause. We don't recognize your claim." Doug stirred a pot. "You'll recognize this stew. It melts armor." Eudora walked to the front line and raised her blade. "You want a war? Bring better boots." The first wave landed fast, armored, well-trained, efficient. They lasted 6 minutes. Knife fighters dropped them like weeds. Soup bombs ignited trenches. Tylo summoned windstorms with calculus chance. Mick reprogrammed their targeting systems by taxing trajectory angles. The dreadnought opened fire. Missiles screamed through the sky. Doug flipped a switch. Steam towers burst from the soil. The missiles dissolved in herbal vapor. The captain of the cruiser opened a channel. "What are you people?" Mick stepped forward. "We were accountants, postal workers, gardeners, lunatics. You dumped us on a death world," Eudora added. "Now the planet calls us family." Tylo smiled. "Kevin says thanks for the resources?" The enemy captain hesitated. "This won't be the last fleet. We're counting on it," Mick replied, then cut the transmission. The dreadnought limped away. Haven didn't celebrate. They got back to work. Mick updated zoning laws. Eudora trained a militia. Doug invented soup-based electricity. Tylo anointed a talking tree. Haven expanded. The death world didn't resist. It helped. The assembly convened in panic. One delegate whispered what they were all thinking. "We didn't send them to die. We sent them to evolve." And they had. The War Council met beneath a levitating boulder, which Tylo insisted was symbolic. Mick had tried to file it as architectural drift, but the rock refused to stay put unless addressed by name. Kevin was getting demanding. Still, there were bigger problems. 3 more factions were converging on Haven's territory, each backed by different empires, each believing the Death World had no legitimate government. "We're not fighting wars anymore," Mick said. "We're administering consequences." Doug stirred soup with a flamethrower. "So what's the plan?" "Tax invasion," Mick replied. Tylo beamed. "Kevin says yes." Eudora cracked her neck and set down a crate labeled diplomacy knives. "Define tax invasion," she said. Mick tapped his holopad, projecting a rotating sphere covered in red zones. "Grachter's terrain is reactive. We influence it. We create logic where there was chaos. So we charge for entry, penalize aggressive intent, and destabilize unlawful combatants with revenue-based zoning. Explain it to someone with knife skills, not a calculator," Eudora said. "If they attack, the planet taxes their actions in real time. It's not just terrain anymore, it's infrastructure. Built around behavior." Doug nodded. "Soup's ready for distribution. Spicy enough to burn metal. Blessings from the ladle." Tylo clutched Kevin and chanted softly. "The skies are listening." Within hours, Haven's perimeter activated. Gravity surged in pulses where unauthorized movement occurred. Violent emotions triggered terrain spikes. Verbal threats translated into tax penalties, literal energy drains that weakened attackers' equipment. The First Army came in loud and confident. Plasma rifles. Hover tanks. Propaganda drones. They lasted 15 minutes. Eudora greeted them at the canyon edge, threw a knife through their forward comms relay, then pointed at a glowing sign above the ravine. "Foreign military entry, 98% tariff." When the general refused to negotiate, the air taxed his oxygen. His command staff passed out. The tanks ran dry. They retreated. "Next," she muttered, picking dirt from her blade. The second force deployed stealth units across Haven's eastern ridge. Mick rerouted tectonic fees through the mountain range. The rocks moved. The infiltrators fell into a pit labeled "Unpaid Deductions." "Effective," Doug noted. "They scream less when they owe money." Tylo preached to the clouds. Rain fell in Morse code. A storm baptized a scout ship. It landed, confessed, and defected to Haven's weather ministry. The third group never made it past the fog. Doug had cooked something the night before that produced an atmosphere allergic to deception. The fog read minds. The invaders lied about their intent. The fog turned acidic. Mick received a message from the assembly. "Cease planetary manipulation immediately. You are destabilizing a Class 0 hazard zone." He wrote back. "We turned it into a municipality. You're welcome." They didn't reply. Tylo organized a peace summit with the remaining survivors from all factions. They met in the Garden of Loud Moss, where plants echoed your secrets if you shouted. It kept everyone honest. Mick drafted a temporary ceasefire contract. Doug served tea that calmed bloodlust. Eudora disarmed every guest by tossing their weapons into the soup of sincerity, a bubbling cauldron that rejected liars. "You came to kill," she said to one representative. "But now you're here for policy." "We didn't expect structure," the ambassador muttered. "No one ever does," Mick said. "But you get used to it." By the end of the summit, 5 factions signed the Haven Compact. They accepted knife duels as arbitration, soup as sustenance, and taxes as divine law. The Deathworld accepted them in return. The ground grew quieter. Weather stabilized. Wildlife nested instead of hunted. Even the terrain had started behaving, except for Kevin, who levitated higher every time Tylo told a joke. Haven was no longer a miracle. It was a fact. That night the dreadnought returned. Not the first. This one was bigger. Sharper. It hovered without warning. Then it broadcast a single phrase. "You have 30 minutes. Doug poured broth into missile tubes. Eudora summoned the knife choir, 40 warriors who sang in blade strikes. Tylo prayed with his forehead pressed to Kevin's surface. Mick studied the sky calm. "They're going to test us," he said. "Let them." The dreadnought launched a kinetic spear. It tore through the clouds, glowing with intent. Mick calculated the impact, filed a provisional motion to redirect, and fed it into the tax grid. The spear curved midair. The terrain responded. A mountain leaned sideways and caught it like a backboard. "Denied," Mick said. The dreadnought fired again. This time, a storm caught the blast. Tylo's followers directed the wind with synchronized chants. The lightning bent backward. The shot returned to sender. The dreadnought reeled. It prepared for orbital cleansing. Haven didn't wait. Eudora led the charge, blades screaming, riding a wind-powered assault board. Doug's explosive soup filled trenches with energy. Mick activated ground-det. Terrain shifted, charging every blast the ship fired until its own systems couldn't process the cost. The dreadnought's shields collapsed. Tylo walked to the tallest peak, Kevin in hand, and whispered one word. "Now." The ground opened. Not violently, formally. The planet delivered a single, pulsing spire of energy straight into the dreadnought's core. It didn't explode. It shut down. Gracefully. As if politely asked to leave. The ship descended gently, lights dimming. When it touched down, it released a crew of silent, stunned soldiers who dropped their weapons and knelt. "What is this place?" one asked. Doug offered him a spoon. "Home," he said. The assembly summoned a final emergency session, cloaked in panic and silence. Footage from Gractha 9 played in loops. A ship, surrendered without violence. A Deathworld functioning as a capital. A rock declared holy, a society built on soup, and humans rewriting the laws of planetary interaction. They were supposed to die. Instead, they'd become a movement. "They've declared independence," one delegate muttered. "A former exile colony. Now a federation." "Not just a federation," another replied. "A model. Species are defecting to them. We should retaliate." "With what?" "Every fleet we've sent either joined them or came back converted. They weaponized spreadsheets." "How do you counter that?" A third delegate raised a trembling hand. "We underestimated humanity." In Haven, there were no victory parades. No grand declarations. Just work. The streets were quiet except for music, laughter, and the clink of spoons against bowls. Eudora trained new recruits in the art of aggressive negotiation. Doug taught irrigation techniques powered by optimism and fermented basil. Tylo led a chorus in 6 languages, harmonizing with the local weather. Mick finalized the Federation Charter, the last clause written in a tone only lawyers understood and only accountants feared. "We're stable," he said. "That's the real victory. No one's tried to kill us in 3 days," Doug added. "Might be a record. People used to scream when they saw the terrain," Eudora said. "Now they picnic." Tylo closed his eyes. "Kevin says the planet has dreams now." A delegation arrived from the edge of assembly space. Refugees, exiles, those considered broken by their own people. They came not to flee but to learn. Mick greeted them with a ledger and a smile. You'll be taxed. You'll be fed. You'll work. You'll be defended. You'll be weird. Welcome. They were assigned homes by lottery and tasks by skill. Some brought strange machines. Others brought memories too painful to speak aloud. All of them brought hope that something better existed, and found it waiting. The assembly, cornered by their failure, attempted diplomacy. A single ambassador, sent in humility and heavily armed, requested a meeting with Haven's leadership. Doug handed him soup before he could speak. You're safe here. Unless you're rude. Eudora removed 3 visible weapons and one the ambassador didn't know he had. We'll hear your offer. We just might not care. The ambassador hesitated. You have power. Influence. You could be a threat to galactic balance. We were the threat when we were powerless, Mick said. Now we're precedent. The ambassador unfolded a message. The assembly proposes recognition. A place at the table. You'll be heard officially. Tylo reached out and burned the message with a spark from Kevin. We already are. The ambassador left without an agreement, but without a wound either. That alone was newsworthy. More species came. Some from curiosity. Others in quiet desperation. Haven expanded, not by conquest, but by invitation. Its core rules remained unchanged. Defend each other, feed everyone, and never apologize for being strange. Doug launched a culinary satellite to provide orbital soup to travelers. Eudora established the Knife Accords as an official dispute resolution system. Mick wrote the first interplanetary code of fair chaos, ratified with applause and mild explosions. Tylo ordained 3 moons and declared one Tuesday a sacred day of introspection and salsa dancing. And the Deathworld itself kept learning. The land shifted to accommodate growing minds. The weather played lullabies. Rivers carried coded messages for those who knew how to listen. Haven didn't just exist, it flourished. But peace did not mean stagnation. One morning, a signal pulsed across the stars, faint but unmistakable. Help. A colony outside assembly jurisdiction had been struck by a rogue AI hive. Survivors were being hunted. The assembly ignored it. Haven did not. Mick called the council. This is not our war, he said. But it's our proof. Eudora stood. We go. Doug packed emergency broth. Everyone deserves a second chance. Tylo whispered to Kevin. He agrees. Time to share the weird. They mobilized within hours. Not an army, an ecosystem. Ships grown from Haven's own terrain lifted from the soil, powered by math and faith and recycled ambition. They flew not to invade, but to rescue. The hive never saw them coming. Eudora's team landed through a meteor storm, blades drawn. Doug's soup scorched enemy circuits. Mick redirected AI logic using contradictory tax forms until systems overloaded. Tylo brought the storm with him. When the last drone fell, they offered peace, not punishment. The colony joined the Federation. News spread like fire in dry leaves. Haven wasn't an accident anymore. It was a solution. The Assembly, seeing their grip dissolve, voted in secret to recognize the Federation. The motion passed with bitter silence. Mick received the formal recognition in his inbox. He archived it without reading. What now? Doug asked. We keep going, Eudora said. People still need saving. We never wanted to rule, Mick said. We just wanted to matter. Tylo lifted Kevin to the sky. Now we do. Haven endured. Not because it was perfect, but because it was honest. Because its founders, broken, strange, underestimated, built it not with ideology or fire, but with soup, knives, spreadsheets, and love. And the galaxy, watching, began to believe again.